Zach, we are back and we are talking dynasty moves to make right now. The end of the season is quickly approaching, the end of your fantasy football season. That is, of course, only a handful of weeks left. It's time to possibly make some moves. We got a whole bunch to dive into today, but before we do, please leave a like on the video, comment down below some moves you're thinking about making. We want to hear all about it, and we want to see you over in our Patreon Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get in that Discord server for a free 7-day trial and see what we can do for your dynasty experience, not just your rosters, but the experience as a whole. It's a great community over there. With that said, Zach, all the promo in the books. Let's get to the content that people came for. And the first things up, coming straight from our Discord, we were asked about our panic meter on Malik Nabers. Is there something to panic about after weeks 1 through 4? I believe he was the wide receiver 1. I don't have that specific information. I do know that he was at 22.9 fantasy points per game. So I believe he was the wide receiver 1 at that point. But looking at the last 5 games, still somewhat respectable. Wide receiver 21 with 13.9 fantasy points per game in PPR scoring, of course. Still wide receiver 10 in fantasy points per game overall. So, Zach, short-term versus long-term panic. You look at the short-term, very friendly remaining schedule rest of season. You got Dallas, New Orleans, Baltimore, Atlanta, Indy, all very friendly matchups. And still being heavily targeted despite a quarterback change. This last week was pretty rough. A lot of us probably saw the post-game interview he gave where he was seemingly not thrilled with some of the play calling that was going on. But 8, 13, 11, 10, 9 targets in the last 5 games. But Zach, panic meter on Malik Nabers. Is it high? Is it low? Should we even be worried? I got some trades here of what some things have gone down in leagues out in the ether. But I want to hear from you first. What do you think about Malik Nabers?
Yeah, so Bob, look, it's not that I'm panicking, but it's more so managing my expectations, which this is kind of what I expected with Malik Nabers. And lo and behold, I sure as bleep did not expect a wide receiver 1 season from Malik Nabers. And I was just all the more impressed when it did happen. But this is kind of what I expected, wide receiver 2 range, some games where he's just out of focus. So it's just, you got. I'm very big, and this is not the first time you've heard me say the term manage my expectations. I would do that with Malik Nabers. I'm not panicking, but this is kind of what I expected. When you have a mid quarterback, you're going to have some results like we've seen from Malik Nabers since week 4. And this is what, if I'm a Malik Nabers dynasty owner, everything that I expected, and I'm hoping that it gets better moving forward with whatever the Giants do in terms of their quarterback position.
If there's anything you're going to do this offseason that you haven't done in the past, managing your expectations and learning that, yes, sometimes rookies do better than we expect. They exceed our expectations, but we can't have these lofty expectations for guys. And I understand that we want to draft Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison, etc., to be our team's wide receiver 1 at some point. We want to pencil them into that roster spot. You can't do that early on if you're expecting to start them in any capacity early on in their careers. You just can't do it. You're very seldom going to get away with that. These are kind of the speed bumps we expected. My panic meter is an absolute 0 for Malik Nabers long-term. Still love the talent. Questions about quarterback next year. How good are they going to be? Are they going to be able to snag someone in the draft that we like? There's obviously going to be questions there, but if there's anything we've learned about quarterback over the past few years in drafts and our assessment of them, the league's assessment, so on, a lot of hit or miss with that quarterback position. So I am still in on Malik Nabers. Some recent trades I just wanted to bring up to kind of get a gauge of what's going on with Malik Nabers for people. First one off the rip, Zach, Malik Nabers or Devonta Smith and an early 25-second. What do you think about that deal?
I'd much rather have the Malik Nabers side there. Devonta Smith is very frustrating right now. If you're a holder of him in dynasty formats, he's just very inconsistent, very boomer bust. And then, of course, A.J. Brown is there to cap his ceiling.
Yep. I'm with you there 100%. Moving on to the next one. Malik Nabers were a couple of breakouts this year. Jackson Smith and Jigba doing wonderful things. I believe he's still a top 12 wide receiver, a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. George Pickens has shown up this season as well in pretty good capacity. I believe he's in the wide receiver 2 range still. Malik Nabers or both of these guys, Zach, what do you think?
That's tough to turn down. 2 for 1. I think I'd take the 2 there as much as I'd like to hang on to Malik Nabers. If you had made it just one of those guys plus a second, I'd probably still choose Malik Nabers. But if you're giving me both of those, I'll take both of those guys, and I'll give you your share of Malik Nabers and the frustrating quarterback situation that is the Giants.
Yeah, I can really see both sides of these. I probably lean Malik Nabers as well, or on my own, I guess. But I love JSN. We all know that. George Pickens has had a nice enough season. That's one where I probably take JSN and run, move George Pickens off for something else. As much as he's done well this year, still, concerned long term with how good or bad George Pickens becomes. Would like to see more out of him still, besides just a wide receiver too. But hey, if it's a stretch lineup, like if you have a start 10, start 11, I may be a little more considerate of the JSN Pickens side. But if it's a start 8, maybe more considerate of Nabers. And the last one here, a bunch of 1-for-1 deals going for Malik Nabers here. Zach, here's a whole list. Tell me if there's any guys you'd prefer over Malik Nabers. Let's just do that. So straight up, Malik Nabers or Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brock Bowers in a half-point tight end premium, Puka Nacua. Would you rather have any of those guys over Malik Nabers right now?
I think I'd rather have most of those guys over Malik Nabers. Just to go over the list, Nico Collins, I'd rather have AJ Brown. I'd rather have Brock Bowers. I'd rather have Puka Nacua. I think I would take Nabers over Marvin Harrison at this point. Yeah, but if I had to pick one, to have a better situation moving forward, I think Harrison with Kyler Murray is going to be fine. I'd rather have that situation than what the situation that Malik Nabers is inheriting at this present moment.
Zach, you got a segment you're bringing to us. Tell me about it. What are your thoughts?
Disclaimer, this is gross, but just hear me out. Give me some time. With the mounting losses at the quarterback position, we've lost Dak Prescott and Daniel Jones the last 2 weeks. When I say lost, I mean fantasy lost, not anything else. Okay. And the inevitable loss of a few more quarterbacks, whoever they may be. I am buying Will Levis. Giant asterisks, however you want to put an asterisk there. Giant asterisks for the rest of this season, not for dynasty long-term purposes. I don't have an opinion on that yet because I need to see where the Titans fall in the draft order. I need to see what the quarterback prospects coming out of college look like. Right now, it looks like there's 2 really good ones. We'll see about the rest, right? And the Titans are actually playing some decent football lately. They just beat the Houston Texans. For all the quarterbacks drafted in 2023, since October, Will Levis has the best quarterback rating, 68% completion percentage, 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. One was a garbage time Hail Mary, 111 passer rating, and a divisional win against the Houston Texans in Houston this last Sunday. He's quarterback 19 in points per game the last 3 weeks. That's points per game, not quarterback overall. Points per game is the way to neutralize that stat for anybody who didn't play or had a bye week. Quarterback 19 in points per game. The last 3 weeks, only 1 point behind Jayden Daniels and 1 point behind Jordan Love. Those are 2 quarterbacks that we absolutely love. Almost unanimously, people you talk to, they love those quarterbacks. 4 points ahead of Baker Mayfield and the beloved C.J. Stroud. So 4 points per week ahead of those 2 quarterbacks for the last 3 weeks. Incredibly favorable schedule moving forward. He has the number 1 rated strength of schedule remaining at the quarterback position for fantasy purposes with matchups against Washington. Look at what Cooper Rush just did. Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and then Jacksonville again, week 17, which is your fantasy championship. So you look at Sleeper, you look at Will Levis, every matchup is green, and he's playing much better. As we're recording this on Monday, all these trades happened today. Will Levis for 2 25 third-round picks. I would do that for the remainder of the season. Will Levis and a 25 third for Tony Pollard. Give me the Will Levis side on that one. Will Levis, I did see a lot of 26 and 25 second-round picks. Take your pick. And then Will Levis and Tyler Lockett for Adonai Mitchell and a 25 third. Outside of the second-round picks, which you can make an argument for, those are all instant smash deals for a quarterback that I feel like I can reliably start for the rest of the season. There's no matchup where those are all bottom 10 defenses in terms. It's gross. It feels weird. But if you're a competitor and you need a quarterback and you're starting Tommy DeVito or Jameis Winston or Cooper Rush, you can't start those and hang on to those guys with any kind of confidence like you can Will Levis. And that's all I'm saying here is that for the rest of the season, I'm buying Will Levis and I'm starting Will Levis.
I can't fault your thinking here, your thought process, because Will Levis, just by the numbers, has been solid since his return to starting. For me, though, I've seen enough negative that I'm not necessarily out, because on some of these deals, like 225 thirds, if I'm a competitive team and I just lost Dak, I only have 2 quarterbacks, whatever the case is, I'm not super opposed to that. That's 225 thirds. Those are as good as dart throws anyway. more than happy to say goodbye to those. But I'll tell you what I am doing. If I do have Will Levis down the stretch, good or bad, take these coming games, because another thing that you kind of talked about is, or want to discuss, is they can't do a lot this offseason when it comes to the quarterback position. They've kind of gotten close to enough wins. If they keep winning a few more games, they're not going to be in the quarterback race in the draft. Yes, maybe they could sign one. I don't believe there's a ton of viable free agent quarterbacks coming up. So sure, they could sign one. They could draft one. Who knows how good that quarterback is going to be, if they're going to usurp Will Levis right away. Not saying Will Levis is great, but you know how NFL coaches can be in terms of getting the rookie quarterbacks on the field, and maybe they should let him sit by Levis for a little bit. But I'm taking this hot streak he's set to finish off the season with and using that as fuel to sell him immediately the first chance I get the season closes. I know player value goes down once the season is over, pick value goes up. The thing is, if they get far enough away from top-end draft capital, keep in mind they can always trade up. That's going to fuel the fire that, oh, Will Levis is here to stay. He's going to rise through fantasy ranks, dynasty ranks, that is, offseason rankings, the whole nine. And I've seen enough gross Will Levis play to not really want a whole lot to do with him outside of, like you said, Zach, a break glass in case of an emergency, last-ditch effort, make the playoffs, win in the playoffs. That's what I'm hoping for here. Price is dependent on, like I said, the two-thirds. I'm pretty much here for a 26-second, I guess. Will Levis plus a bit for Adonai Mitchell and a 25 third. Not an Adonai Mitchell guy, so I'm more than happy to do that. But yeah, I don't hate the concept, Zach. I think it's one of those things where just depending where you're at on a guy, worth buying in on, possibly if you can get the right costs, but not always. But another discussion that's worth having straight from our Discord, how to move on from Christian McCaffrey, who was a target, I should say. Should you move on from Christian McCaffrey? And quite frankly, it's been a season forget for CMC and managers and company. Didn't make his season debut until week 10. His first two showings were okay, but each game has been less impressive since, and it surely doesn't help that Brock Purdy missed this previous game. And it's a question, is he just kind of ramping up? We saw a good amount of usage his first week back, so I don't think that's the case. Or is this kind of the new normal? You could argue with the 49ers, you kind of get those senses where nothing can go right for a team this year. You kind of get that for the 49ers. The Bengals, you kind of feel that way too. Nothing can go right. They can't win the close ones, whatever the case is. They can't get away from an injury bug, whatever the case is. It feels like that's kind of how this season is going. So is it time to move off the 28-year-old who will be 29 this offseason in Christian McCaffrey? Or could this be a buy low opportunity for those teams looking to compete, possibly push for a championship this season yet before trade deadlines close, before the playoffs? Whatever the case is this the crown jewel, Zach? I want to hear from you. What do you think about CMC? Is it time to move on? Or is it time to buy in?
Bob, this is the rare circumstance where I think both answers are okay. CMC, if you're in a position where he's not helping you in the short term, and this is a great opportunity if you have extra assets and you want his level of production, then I think that exists too. There's been years where Saquon Barkley wasn't this version that we're seeing of him right now, right? Sure. And that's the window you have right now with CMC. Same thing with Derrick Henry. There's been years where Derrick Henry hasn't been as effective as he is right now. Well, that's what CMC is going through right now. So not every single player, every single year is going to maximize their ceiling for whatever the situation, their health, their team's health, other circumstances. It just is what it is. And so I think that both of these things can exist in the situation, which is very rare. It's very rare that you're talking about a player like, oh, it's a good time to buy or sell. Well, I think it's both, really, depending on your situation, your team situation. Do you have him? Do you want him? I would be happy to buy or sell Christian McCaffrey. I don't think this year changes very much outside of just saying exactly what you said. It's just not their year. They've been decimated by injuries.
I think my biggest issue or gripe is going to be, if I have CMC, what I can get for him, and if I don't have CMC, what I have to pay to go get him. And looking at some recent trades for Christian McCaffrey, the price ain't cheap. The cheapest one I have for you, and I have more recent trades pulled up since I made the show sheet a couple hours ago. Recent trades right now, Christian McCaffrey or Jordan Addison, all happening today. Christian McCaffrey or a 25 first straight up. I saw that 5 times. Christian McCaffrey or a 26 first and 25 second. Saw that 3 times. Love the schematics here, but yikes. And then Christian McCaffrey or 2 25 first round picks. Is this 2022 or 2023 again? Because I don't know. That deal just seems whack as all get up, but it kind of shows you the range of what you could be possibly having to pay if you want Christian McCaffrey. And looking now, just more of the same have kind of been added, another first and second. I mean, Christian McCaffrey is tough to want to buy, but feels pretty good if I'm getting that in a sell. Especially for a team, if you are competitive and you have Christian McCaffrey, yes, maybe running back has kind of been a sore spot and you've kind of limped your way here and you're hoping CMC is the one that gets you over the hump and gets you through the playoffs to win a championship. But man, that's expensive to go pay. But if you've made it this far, you maybe have some decent running back depth and you can get a 25 first straight up, a 25 first and second, or God forbid, 2 25 first, or maybe a wide receiver you like more than Jordan Addison, more than we do at least. By all means, I'd be saying goodbye, and I can't picture a lot of situations where I'd want to buy in right now. I'd probably just look elsewhere. Somebody that doesn't have question marks, isn't on a team with a questionable offense. Granted, my first thought was going to be kind of, hey, they might decide to shut him down at some point this season if they kind of fall out of the race. They're a 5-6 football team. They're still basically in the race for their division because nobody in that team has a better record than 6-5. Nobody in that division, has a better division. Nobody in that division has a better record than 6-5. So they're still well within the playoff race. So I don't see him getting shut down unless the injury flares up again, in which case, hopefully you have Jordan Mason kicking around. You could still sell him again. Either way, I can't imagine myself wanting to buy in on Christian McCaffrey right now. Zach, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
You would feel awesome if you had bought Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry back in 2021 or the offseason of 2021, and you had the next 3 years of Saquon Barkley production. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying it's like, this is not, to me, like, oh, this is the cliff. This is not what this is for me. It's just not his and their year. And I do think that next year, and we can never predict health. That is always a giant asterisk on every statement we make. We can never predict health, but next year I would expect better production from Christian McCaffrey and the 49ers with a full offseason of health, with an offseason to address their offensive line, to get healthy, so on and so forth. Again, can't predict if he'll tear his ACL or hurt his Achilles in training camp, but I just think you're at a potential buying opportunity like you were with Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry in the year 2021. We've seen this before with alpha running backs. We'll see it again. There will always be a down year. They'll have a year. I mean, we were talking about it with Breece Hall earlier this season, right? I would still be excited as heck to buy Breece Hall at this point. So I get it. You're a little bit more it seems like you're safe. You want to safeguard yourself from the situation. I understand that. I'm just saying that this has happened before, and those running backs have bounced back tremendously.
I can't get behind spending a first, really, at this point to go get Christian McCaffrey. We can talk players that are around a first-round pick. I'd be a lot more willing to do that, but just knowing how I just don't want to trade first because I know how firsts work when it comes to their value inflating in the offseason. If you want to talk players that are around the value of a first-round pick, by all means, I'm more than happy to do so at this point. But I'd much rather, somebody throw out the situation of pivoting off of Christian McCaffrey for a Chase Brown plus, obviously. And that's something I'd be interested in. As much as I have my suspicions about Chase Brown retaining a lot over the offseason, if I can get a plus on top of Chase Brown that is a little more long-term, I'd be open to doing that. But we got to move on. We got to get to the next segment here. Zach, you got something going straight from my heart at this one. But I get it. And it's a discussion that needs to be had, to say the least. So, Zach, let's talk about it.
Let me just start by saying I don't want to talk about it, okay? But we kind of have to, right? Jayden Reed has been one of the most infuriating players. Yesterday's game, again, we're recording this on Monday. Yesterday's game, 3 targets on the first drive, none thereafter. Second game in a row where he's targeted 2 or more times on the first drive and not again the rest of the game. Why? Only 20% target share in 2 weeks this season. Only once since week 1. And Bob, 4 total red zone targets which is good for 69th in the NFL amongst all wide receivers. That is so bad. Okay. His target share per week since week 7, 12.1%, week 8, 11.1%, week 9, 15.4%. They had a bye week 10, and then in week 11, 11.9%. Didn't go look for yesterday's game. Bob, you're our Packers guy. What's going on? What do we do about this? Talk me off the cliff here, Bob.
I don't know if I can, honestly, because at this point, I think he might just be fancy Jordan Addison. And I hate to say it because I love Jayden Reed, and Jordan Addison, very talented player, but I'll be the first to tell you he's probably overvalued in a lot of leagues or situations, whatever the case is. But you don't have to go any further.
Oh, no.
Sorry, Zach. I didn't mean to break you like that. But you don't have to go any further than looking at the target shares. You brought it up. Jayden Reed, 17.6%. Romeo Doubs, 19.3%. 15.2% to Dontavian Wicks. 12.8% to Tucker Kraft. 9.4% to the running back Josh Jacobs. Those are the top 5 target getters in this offense. And none of those, I mean, outside of Jacobs, that's a good number for a running back. But for the rest of the positions, not real great for anything, for any type of production. You need you need like at least 20% production or 20% target share, to have likely sustainable good production. Jayden Reed just has that. Something that Noah brings up is that he feels as though Jayden Reed's a little schemy, a little gadgety, let's say. And I tend to agree. You see him on a lot of sweeps. You see him a lot of these end around time play, these tap passes, And when you think about it, for those of you who don't know, the NFL scripts NFL teams script their first X number of plays, their first drive coming out of a break, whatever the case is, there's usually a script in mind. And when you talk about a player who might be a little scheme dependent or gadget dependent, whatever the case is, when you have a player who has a ton of targets on their first drive and not a lot going on thereafter, that's a huge red flag to something like that. I still believe in the talent of Jayden Reed. I just think this offense functions best when it's spread out. And unfortunately for our fantasy teams, the only thing that really helps is Jordan Love and Josh Jacobs. Other than that, you're kind of going to be hoping for these boom weeks at most at this point. I think he's a decent enough flex play, but I said it this offseason when Jordan Addison was valued as a top 24 dynasty wide receiver. Jayden Reed right now, wide receiver 22 on Keep Trade Cut, just a resource for where some players are being valued. That's too high at this point because you cannot rely on him as a top 2 or 3 wide receiver in your lineup week to week, depending on the matchup. Maybe you can get a little more cute with it, but there's just the mouths to feed in this offense, and it's not even like they're good mouths to feed. Like they're just guys. Like Romeo Doubs isn't an elite wide receiver. Dontavian Wicks isn't an elite wide receiver. Tucker Kraft, not an elite tight end. None of this is news to anybody, but here we are. It's unfortunate, and I hate it, but we drastically need to reel in any expectations we had for Jayden Reed, and it pains me to say it because I love Jayden Reed, and I love the talent, and I like watching him play every week. He's like the number 1 player I cheer for on that team. Like I love Jordan Love, love what's happened with that, how we've gotten another, great quarterback going forward, hopefully. But Jayden Reed is the player I really cheer for on this team, and I get the most excited about when he does something cool. And, the fact that he's not really drumming up points from my fantasy teams that I have him on plenty of, it's sad. It's heartbreaking. And I can hope we can have hopium, Zach, that maybe next year he takes over and is the dominant wide receiver 1 that he probably could be on this team. But realistically, I can't sit here and say that because I haven't seen anything to really indicate that at this point. Yes, he has a great passer rating when targeted, but again, that comes down to if he's getting schemed these quote-unquote gimmies, these layups, that's going to inflate that number too. So it's tough to do. I'm probably I don't know if I could bring myself to sell him because I'm not going to get anything that's going to make me happy to sell him. But just one of those things, man. We drastically need to change our expectations going forward as anything more than a flex play. Just can't do it. With that said, we will move on and talk about a quarterback, a rookie quarterback who has risen through the ranks in Dynasty fantasy football and fantasy football even this season. And the question coming out of our Discord is should Bo Nix be a top 12 Dynasty quarterback? Should he be looking at the season quarterback 8 in fantasy points per game ahead of the Monday night game? Are we looking at trade down scenarios, trade up scenarios? Are we interested in Bo Nix? Currently quarterback 12 on Keep Trade Cut. Again, it's just a resource to find some values where people have them stacked up. Zach, I got some recent trades, but I want to hear from you. Should Bo Nix, my boy, be a top 12 Dynasty quarterback in fantasy football or Dynasty fantasy football, however you want to word it?
It's tough to say top 12 quarterback, right? I think he's quarterback 7 on the season, if you didn't mention that already.
Quarterback 8.
Yeah, quarterback 8, but it's there's been quarterbacks that have had injuries, they've been out, that affects things. I don't think Bo Nix has missed much of any playing time, which really factors into that as well. That there have been some quarterbacks that have missed time. So that's tough. It's probably on the borderline. But I will say I'm a Bo Nix fan. Like I'm a guy that I do have quite a few shares because he was kind of a cheap quarterback to acquire, end of the first, early second round pick for most parts in your super flex drafts. I'd definitely be buying on Bo Nix still to this day because I think the ceiling is much more than what we've seen. You're talking about him being successful with, who's playing tight end every week for him. Cortland Sutton's been phenomenal. Marvin Mims is had a resurgence. So what happens when they get more talent in that skill position room? I am a big fan of Bo Nix.
You and me both. You kind of touched on it. What he's done with a lackluster surrounding supporting cast, but beneath Sean Payton, has impressed everybody. I don't think there's anybody out there who can look at Bo Nix and what he's done this year and say, that could be done easily. Any quarterback in this draft class could have done that. I don't think anybody, and I think that's what cooled us on a lot of the expectations year one for Bo Nix. He didn't have the supporting cast in the wide receiver room as Caleb Williams and the tight end room with Cole Kmet and that trio of wide receivers. Didn't have what J.D. McCarthy had coming into the season, great offensive coach, plus all the weapons around him as well. Probably had one of the overall worst situations going into. Cortland Sutton, Mr. Mid all his career until this year, finally a surgent season. I won't call it a resurgent season because he hasn't done it before. But Bo Nix, all about it, should absolutely be a top 12 dynasty quarterback, in my opinion. Right now, there's probably an argument to be had on the fringe of quarterback one land in that like 10 to 15 range. All guys probably have an argument to be had. But you look at, let's start at number 11. You have Drake May on Keep Trade Cut. Then you have Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Anthony Richardson at quarterback 17. We've heard enough of him today in this podcast. But I can't say I'd put a single one of them over Bo Nix right now. Caleb Williams has been fine. He's been good, but not great. Bo Nix has been exceptional. And given everything around him, and maybe Caleb could do better with a better offensive mind by his side. Drake May, I see what people are excited about, but Bo Nix, has put it all out there and just been awesome. So I can't deny it. Looking at recent trades, Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy in a 25-second, C.J. Stroud or Bo Nix in an early 25-second, Bo Nix or Brock Purdy in a late 25 first-round pick. Zach, are you not picking Bo Nix in any of those deals? If you are, let me know. Let me know why.
I gotta be honest with you. These are tough prices. Maybe the JJ McCarthy one. I'm still a believer in CJ Stroud. He's had to put that offense on his back. Had injuries to Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs, and throughout his entire offensive line, they have not been good, as I just mentioned. I'm still a believer in him, even though he has not looked good the last few weeks. And then Brock Purdy, we've had that discussion about the 49ers. I'm giving Brock Purdy and the late 25 first. No, I'd rather have Brock Purdy in the late 25 first. That's not to say that I don't want Bo Nix. It's nice to see that these are the prices now for Bo Nix because I'm glad I have a good amount, a few shares of him. But outside of the JJ McCarthy deal, I don't want to move CJ Stroud for Bo Nix, and I don't want to move Brock Purdy for Bo Nix. I think we're playing what have you done for me lately, and that's a dangerous game. That like Dynasty is a game of patience, a game of understanding situations and context, managing your expectations, as we discussed. And to sit here and say that Bo Nix is going to end up better than CJ Stroud, I don't know about that. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. I know CJ Stroud's having a tough year, but let's take everything into account when we're having that discussion.
And I mean, at least you get a little on top of Bo Nix in that CJ Stroud deal. So there's that at least going for it. It is technically still a tear down. But I think it's one of those things. And you talked about the rising cost of Bo Nix's value. I think it's one thing that we need to do in playing that what have you done for me lately game is to not let values ascend or descend so quickly. I get we want to have this appropriate knee-jerk reaction right off the rip. But I tell you what, there have been so many occasions where I wanted to go do this thing because this player went and did this or that thing, good or bad, and I ended up either not doing it because I didn't pull the trigger in time, another player bought the player, sold the player, whatever the case is, and I feel so much better that I didn't do it at all. And one of the things we've said on this channel frequently is it's not always the moves you make. Sometimes it's the moves you don't make. And sometimes knowing when to walk away from making a overpay, like I think the Brock Purdy in late 25 first for Bo Nix is probably a bit of an overpay. Brock Purdy's been having a great year, by the way. So that's too much for me. If you wanted to get into the conversation about a pick swap there, I could probably get down with that. Value going either way, honestly, either favoring Purdy or favoring the Knicks side. I could see both sides to that discussion. But we just got to stop doing this thing where we, and this was wrong from the get-go, but CJ Stroud was the number one quarterback in Dynasty coming into the season for a lot of people because he's so young, just had an incredible year as a rookie. But at the end of the day, what really does it for your fantasy leagues is a good bit of consistency, players that have done it 1 or 2 years in a row before you really make this super huge investment. I mean, we just saw with Sam Laporta this year is another prime example. A guy who rose to the tight end 1 overnight, did crazy things his first season for any tight end, not even just a rookie tight end, but for any tight end to go into the season and do the things he did. Absolutely absurd. Same thing we're seeing with Brock Bowers now. He's risen to tight end 1. The argument is he has a better college profile, and I 100% agree. But at the end of the day, did we learn nothing from what happened with Sam Laporta? And that's a discussion for a different day. We'll probably get into that this offseason, but you'll have to stick around to find out. Subscribe if you're new here. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Leave us a rating, review, comment, like, the whole 9. Join us in that Discord. Get that 25% discount for the holiday season. Getting one of our roster reviews. That link will be in the description box below. But with all that said, Zach and I are going to get the heck out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that you all have a good one.